Welcome back to the Underhand Free Throw. My name is Simon, and today me and my co-host Ian are going to be talking about some of the rookie class of this 2022-2023 NBA season. So the actual title of this video is a little bit weird, and the reason why is because we're planning on making our top 5 rookies. However, that video is going to come a little bit later this week. This video is not our top 5 rookies. This is like our honorable mentions, some guys that are worth talking about but didn't quite make it into our top 5 list. And by honorable, we do mean honorable, so just because these guys aren't necessarily in their top 5 doesn't mean they don't have the chance to, have an awesome second half of the season or be one of the 5 best players of this draft. In the future, 3 to 5 years from now, that could definitely be the case. So if you like this style of content, make sure to subscribe and like the video to see more. We'll have our top 5 rookies of the year in a couple of days uploaded on this channel. But until then, let's talk about some guys we really liked but didn't quite make the cut. Let's move into our rookies. And
Shaedon Sharpe's not on my list, but we should talk about him a little bit because he's fun.
Yeah, I will disclaimer, he's not on my top 5 rookies this season.
Yeah,
and these are 10. In terms of just like personal feelings, he's definitely in my top 5. But in terms of like guys where I really enjoy their style of play, their short-term outlook over the next couple of seasons, Shaedon Sharpe just missed the cut, but we'll still touch on him briefly. So before we dive into our top 5 lists, we wanted to go over a couple of honorable mentions and rookies that didn't quite make the list, but we like. They've been playing well, and I'll let you take the floor here. What rookies didn't quite make your top 5, but you really like, and why?
I wanted to actually talk a little bit about Christian Braun. Pronounced Brown, apparently not Braun. I learned that for the first time this week. Just because, with the exception of maybe one other player, Christian Braun might be one of the most important rookies in terms of the title this year, because he's playing a crucial role on a team with major title aspirations. They're really trying to figure out their defense, and they've been finding answers lately with Braun. And he's not a rookie that I was high on or expected much from, but sometimes you just fall in a situation where with him, he's a large enough, athletic enough body who's good enough at basketball where he's plugging a hole in their roster. And he's been closing games for them occasionally. Like he's a very important piece there, and I think that could be sustainable. Obviously, maybe we see Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. Their games take off a little bit more, and the rotation shrinks, and Christian Braun's not in the playoff rotation this year. But looking at it right now, he seems like, this guy could sneaky be crucial for a contender, even if he's not that good yet. We're talking like he's playing 14 minutes a game. He's not like he's only a good shooter, not a great shooter. He's playing a tiny little role for them, but when he's out there, all of a sudden Denver lineups just kind of like make a little bit more sense. Also, before we get to into rookies, I just want to, as we were going over, as we both studied up a little bit in preparations for this episode, I just want to remind everyone, rookies are not good. They're very exciting, not usually, but just there's so much you have to clean up in your game in the NBA. There's things you have to get good at, and there's things you have to stop doing. And as I'm going over footage and stats, I'm just like, man, there's just so much junk, even with the very best rookies this year. Just like, oh my gosh, you take so many pull-ups and you miss them all, and you turn the ball over, and you're really bad at defense. And so when I look at someone like Christian Braun, I'm more like, oh, you're basically helpful on a contender. That's that goes a long way for a rookie in my mind.
Yeah, Christian Braun's a decent on-ball defender. He's 6'7" and has some length and has just enough quickness to stay in front of people. And I think on a team like the Nuggets, who are just starved for any form of perimeter defense, he does fill a role. He has been playing more lately, and part of that is due to injury. But I think a large part of that is also just because he holds up well defensively, or at least good enough for Michael Malone to play him. And
Yeah.
even though he hasn't necessarily shown like an awesome jump shot or super reliable jump shot in the NBA yet, he was a pretty great shooter in college, and which is, I think, a large
Yeah.
part of why he went in the first round of the draft. I was pretty surprised when he did, but like more and more lately, we're seeing these older rookies, these juniors and seniors in college, especially the 3-and-D wing type guys who come into the NBA and aren't amazing, aren't like blowing you away or anything, but they're good enough to see some minutes and eventually develop into like okay rotation players. And I think Christian Braun likely is going to be one of those guys.
I love seeing a college scorer come into the NBA and just immediately embrace like scrappy hustle guy role, especially when you know that he can do a little bit more. I just think it bodes so well to see a player come in and establish this basement where they're just like, I can play in an NBA rotation because of like, my size and skills, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes defensively and from an energy perspective to establish myself as an NBA player. Because then if they can establish that basement for themselves, anything else just becomes a bonus. So if he eventually does show more of sort of like the pull-up shooting ability he showed at Kansas, right? He's a Kansas guy.
Yeah. Yep.
Like that's just going to be icing on the cake later. I was not big on Braun at all in the pre-draft process. I'm looking at my big board from last year. I had him at 38th. Like he was he was on my board, but not someone that I was particularly interested in. But I'm sold now. Yeah. So honorable mention out to Christian Braun. Who you got?
Okay, one guy. I have 5 honorable mentions. So we'll start from the bottom and go up. My number, like last place guy, was TARI EASON. I like TARI EASON, and I had a really hard time kind of articulating why I like TARI EASON. But I think my favorite part about him is every time I watch him play, it just, when he doesn't have the ball in his hands, it just feels like he moves around the court really well. And he just is very active, just a very active player. He just gets into a lot of situations where he's, either bothering the player he's defending quite a bit, or he's like getting his hands on loose balls or errant passes. He just seems to like make a big chaotic defensive impacts on the game. His offensive game is really weird. It's a lot of almost like out of control car crash drives to the rim where he just kind of like barely gets there and then, tries to contort his body to get some shot off, where like the angle is pretty weird and it doesn't really have a chance of going in, but maybe it gets fouled. But it's a very strange game. He's a very strange player, but I do like his defensive upside.
He's huge. He still looks huge. Like he looked huge in college and he still looks very big in the NBA. He's got really fast hands. He's got a really crazy motor. A guy that we're going to talk about later is Jeremy Sohan, and TARI EASON is kind of Jeremy Sohan if you took away all of his passing ability and turned that into sort of just like average shooting ability. Like it's kind of a little trade-off you make, but like, big, hyper high motor player. I was really high on him I had him at 8. I had him above Jeremy Sohan and a lot of other heralded guy. Just like he was just this big wing who had pretty interesting like slashing skills and wasn't a joke shooter. I was like, how is this guy not going to be a good NBA player? He's even more chaotic looking than I thought he would be. But I'm still very high on TARI EASON, and I mean I might even like him a little bit better than another rookie that didn't make my top 5 that plays in Houston. But there's so much to not like about TARI EASON still. Like he's really far away from being like a overall kind of like productive NBA player. But I mean, he's averaging a steal a game in just under 20 minutes. Like that translates to like, that's like 3 steals per 100 possessions. That's pretty massive. So he's already shown that he's like one of the more disruptive defensive bodies in the NBA. And I think he's got a lot of offensive upside still. So high on TARI EASON. Did not make my top 5, but
his handle is so loosey goosey at the moment.
Yeah.
Like if he tightens that up, I agree he could be a decent offensive player. Right now, the skill development just needs, even Jeremy Sohan is just like so far ahead of TARI EASON in terms of just like being able to dribble and make basic passes, Oh,
he only kind of understands that passing exists. Like I'm sure he's been told by other people, but it's not internalized knowledge yet. It's still something that his coaches are probably like, don't forget that passing exists while he's out there. And he was like that in college too, just like a basic non-entity as a passer.
Well,
and that's
it's Houston, so are they really telling their players that? I don't know.
Well, I mean, they've got other players on their team that do pass the ball. They just don't pass it to like targets that catch it.
Well, Dacian Nix will throw a pass. It's just that
there's another one.
2 seconds left in the shot clock to do it, and the pass will be to someone standing 6 feet behind the 3-point line who wasn't expecting the ball to come his way. So anyway,
and he's not a rookie anymore, but
no.
If he was a rookie, he would not be making an honorable mention on this. That is not they play him a lot more than I would expect them to, and I don't know why when I watch.
Tank Commander.
He's
great at that role. Okay.
Yeah.
Who's your next rookie that you liked but didn't quite make the cut?
I mean, I've got so many rookies that didn't make the cut because I just kind of picked my favorite guy. I don't want to give away, like I'm leaving off one rookie that I'm sure is in everyone's top 3, did not make my top 5, but I'm gonna go.
I think I know who it is.
Interesting. Have I talked about them before? I'm going to talk about, I'll talk about a player that I really do like that didn't quite make my top 5, which is Walker Kessler. Utah fans, listen to this podcast episode because we talk about Utah more than I'm sure a lot of podcasts do today.
More than just about everyone else.
Yeah. I think he's already perfect at his role. Like he's like just in terms of like the 5 things that Utah lets him do. He's really good at them. He's excellent from floater range. He's a really strong finisher at the hoop. He is one of the best rim protectors in the NBA. It's between him and one other player for who's the best defensive player in this class. We'll talk about the other guys soon because they did make my top 5. The Jazz just want to play offense. Like that's their team is built to just be this offensive fun fest of Jordan Clarkson with Kelly Olynyk and Lauri Markkanen, just like, just having the times of their lives. But whenever Walker Kessler's out there, they're a strong defensive team. It's this funny situation that Utah has. We're just like, whoops, we're a strong defensive team because we let the big guy out there. His feet are better than I expected. Like I remember watching him in college and being like, sometimes with those behemoths, like, oh, you look actually pretty nimble for a huge guy in college, but you might get to the NBA and that's just gonna, like, all of a sudden you're Boban Marjanovic. Like he looked nimble. He still looks like nimble, or he did when he was younger. But his footwork is just really smart. Like I actually remember I remember watching that monstrous Embiid game early in the season when Embiid went off for like 59 points and whatever that crazy early Embiid season game was. And he was doing it on Kelly Olynyk and Lauri Markkanen. And then and Walker Kessler came in and Embiid, he didn't stop Embiid. Embiid still just was scoring over him the whole time. But it was like, I was watching Walker Kessler's feet and just like, oh, your defense is perfect. Like you're like step for step, your footwork is, you're like, this was like Dance Dance Revolution guard Embiid edition, like Walker Kessler scored a perfect score. And I mean, Embiid scored anyways, but it was like, oh, you're going to be a dominant backline defender. My only question with him is like, how many minutes is going to be ideal for Walker Kessler on a good NBA team? Like, what does he have to do that he's like a starting level player or a guy that you want to play more than 20 minutes a game? And I think that's still a big question mark and has to do with whether he can become a passer and whether he can learn to shoot it all, or at least hit his free throws at a better rate. But everything else is just like, wow, you're already like getting A+ at.
Yeah, I had Walker Kessler in my guys who just barely missed the cut too. Like you said, just kind of a star in his role already, even though it's not the biggest role in the world. Highly, highly effective player around the rim. He doesn't necessarily take a lot of shots, but when he does, like, it hardly ever misses. And he has like such soft hands and, everything around the rim. He just kind of like finds ways to like flip shots in. And he's like tall and has really long arms. So there's not a whole lot of guys who can contest his shot, even though he's not like much of a leaper, but I do think he has really good instincts, like defensively. So when it comes to timing, when it comes to like just ability to catch and release the ball, maybe those are some indications he could grow into a passer. Like I kind of do agree he would have to add another component to his game to be a really good player you'd want to be a long-term starter. But
Yeah.
Even if not, maybe he's just kind of like a low end starter who's just super solid and isn't going to hurt you, or just like one of the best backup bigs in the NBA for a long time. Like either way, that I think that's a win for Utah, and definitely a guy you want to hold on to. And also because he's a center and because he has such a traditional game, the other thing I'll say is he's probably not going to be that expensive to extend. Because even the best players at this role of being just kind of like an old school big still don't get paid a whole lot.
Yusuf Nurkic, Jonas Valanciunas, like those guys are affordable.
Yeah, they're very reasonable. So for guys like this, where they're really good in their role, but they don't have a like necessarily a star level impact or like crazy offensive upside or anything, if it's a wing, I'm a lot more hesitant about like this guy's a future long-term piece. But for a guy with a role like Walker Kessler, where you can probably pay him like $12 million a year, just hold on to him in perpetuity, like I think that's a great build around piece.
Yeah. Yeah, if the timing works, sometimes it's about timing with those deals. Like, if he's just like kind of balling out in an injury around the time of the time of his contract extension. I also think that $12 million is going to go up as the cap goes up, or if the cap goes up.
Yeah,
like I agree with the principle for sure. And in terms of like on off stats like that, he's basically one of the best. He's like arguably one of the best rookies in the class in terms of actually contributing to winning basketball. If you just want to look at impact, like he doesn't have the ceiling of some of these other players, but in terms of, I think because of his limited role where he's not allowed to make the same rookie mistakes, like Walker Kessler is not taking 10 pull-ups a game and on like 21% shooting, for example, and he's not turning over the ball at all. Like I don't know how many he probably has like less. He's got 25 turnovers on the whole season in 37 games. So it's like just being a low mistake defensive player like that just goes a long way. And I honestly thought about putting Walker Kessler in my top 5.
And the only reason he's not in our top 5 is simply because of like the likely limited offensive upside he has. Like we don't see him developing into an awesome 3-point shooter or great playmaker or everything. Like it could happen. These things do happen, but it's not necessarily like super likely. With his like likely future trajectory, he's probably not going to be like an amazing player in the future. And that's like the only reason he's not on our top 5. But if it was just performance this season, he absolutely would be.
Who you got?
Okay. You want me to go next?
Yeah. Who I brought up Kessler. Yeah, it's your turn.
Well, yeah, I kind of mirrored Kessler, but I can get into my next guy. It's TARI Eason's teammate, JABARI Smith.
Yeah.
He did make the list of guys I like, but isn't necessarily in the top 5. And he wasn't going to make that list, but one of the few credits that I can give to the Houston coaching is they changed the way that they have been using JABARI Smith offensively from the start of the season. Earlier on in the season, they were trying some weird stuff with him. Like really early on in the season, they were just kind of trying him as kind of like a floor spacer, spot up shooter, and that wasn't working. They tried playing him as a small ball 5. That really wasn't working. But lately, they've just settled into using him at the 4, and instead of putting him out beyond the perimeter all the time, they kind of have him just like making these dives where he kind of gets to the like around the free throw line area, and they just have him like catch and fire. And his mid-range shooting so far this year has been like kind of an elite level. I think he's currently shooting 45% from that, free throw line range, that like 12 to 18 footer. He's just been like really effective in that area of the floor. And, he's also been a pretty good on ball defender, providing he's defending wings, not so much against bigs. He does kind of get bullied and pushed around, but for a guy like the 3-point shot isn't there yet. And he was a good 3-point shooter in college, but like the NBA is greater distance and he doesn't necessarily have the quickest release. So maybe those are things that are kind of holding him back a little bit, but like he's been so solid in the mid range and the shooting stroke just like looks so good. It's hard to imagine him not becoming like a great shooter and eventually extending out that range to the 3-point line as well.
Yeah. He's one of the rare players where he's exactly what I thought he would be, like going from the draft till now. It's like,
yeah,
he looks like, in terms of just like, the shooting stroke looking so nice, and then there clearly being some really good defensive tools, but the rest of the game and the body being kind of all question marks. He really looks like he wants to do the right stuff in the role he's playing right now. Like you said, as this sort of like pure finisher, but he's just like he's like teenage skinny right now. He actually looks a little bit skinnier than I thought he would as a rookie. He when he does little face up stuff, he reminds me a little bit of like a poor man's like rookie Chris Bosh, just in this like, oh, you came into the league and you were not quite, your body was not quite ready to be a super good NBA player, but you're really talented, so you can compensate for that in some way. But like, I mean, you do see him trying to play really physically and forcefully in the paint and in the mid range and trying to carve at his space. But it's such an uphill battle when you weigh 190 pounds, or I mean, I'm sure he's like 215 or something like that, but really, really skinny at that height. And one, like, he was so bad to start the year, but he has been pretty good for a little bit now in terms of just like his shooting numbers. He's been pretty close to league average efficiency just over the past like 10, 15 games, where he started off like just jokes, not NBA level at all in terms of what he was doing offensively. But you see all the stuff there of why people got excited about him in the draft. And it's really, I think it's huge that he's already getting better over the first half of his first season in the NBA. So Jabari Smith is still someone worth being pretty excited about.
Well, I think a large part of that is just like the shift away from shooting as many threes and taking more mid ranges, which he's actually making, because the 3-point shot still isn't dropping. But I will say, like, rookies don't shoot 45% from mid range. I mean, most 10-year NBA vets can't even do that. So the fact that he can already, I think, is a really good sign. And like most rookies, as we go on down this list, are horrific mid range shooters. Like, that's generally the thing that, along with, off ball defense, that every rookie just sucks at. And the fact that
they take them too much, like like they do all these
not
weird
just
bad
good,
shots.
but elite is I think really promising. I love guys who have an elite skill, even if they don't have the most well-rounded game, because that's just something to build on.
There's one last player I want to talk about because I know they're not in your top 5. And that's I've got a couple other guys outside the top 5 that I'll get into after, but this is the last one that I know is definitely not in yours, and that is Andrew Nembhard.
Yeah.
You're
not in my top 5.
Now, is it pure Gonzaga distrust of Nembhard that because I think you're probably aware that he is an absolute like darling to a lot of NBA nerd analysts with his play in Indiana. And as I was watching extra, because I've maybe caught 4 or 5 Indiana games this year, he was one of the rookies I wanted to watch a bit more footage of before the podcast. So looking at some of the footage, I was pretty delighted with a lot of what he does out there.
Yeah. I will say the main thing so we'll start with the positives. He's a very smart defender. I mean, not really a surprise, like 23-year-old rookie. I think he was just a 4-year college player, not a 5-year college player. He was a transfer from Florida to Gonzaga, but I don't believe he spent all 5 years in college. We did have a bit of a letdown his final season at Gonzaga, where he had a very, very disappointing tournament showing. And his play in large part resulted in my favorite college team getting upset in the Sweet 16. But what does that have to do with his NBA play, right? So in the NBA, he's been an awesome defensive player, especially like off ball. Again, not something you see from a whole lot of rookies, but he's been solid. He's just been a smart decision maker. Doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Pretty good at, making entry passes, making the right swing play, just, making the right decision with the ball in his hands. Hasn't been a very efficient scorer since his outburst in Golden State, where he kind of like famously single-handedly won the game and kind of broke NBA Twitter for a night. I just kind of feel like people got into the wrong frame of mind thinking of him as this awesome scorer when he's not, right? He's kind of like a low volume, low usage player who's just like solid and doesn't make mistakes.
Yeah, and I don't think I mentioned him as a darling of NBA nerddom, and I don't think any of those people who are into him see him as a scorer. Like, I think he is properly understood amongst at least like people who are watching enough Indiana Pacers games. What's nice about what I think is really nice about his game, that is, and why like I at least thought about him in the top 5, is that like the way he plays is the way that Indiana plays, and without him on the floor, like basically they like to keep multiple point guards out there with Tyrese Halliburton, Nembhard, and TJ McConnell, and just have all these good passers out there, which allows everybody else on the roster to thrive as a finisher, because they've got a lot of just pure finishers in this team, like Buddy Hield as a movement shooter, Miles Turner as a spot up guy and as a roller, Bennedict Mathurin as like, again, sort of like as pure physical like attacker and pull up guy. Like they really need extra passers out there to make everything that's working offensively for Indiana like starts like is this symbiosis between passers and finishers, and those players having clear roles. So one of the like the big reason they're like the reason he's starting, like that's the reason he's starting, is because that's what Indiana's style is being able to have these multiple smart ball handlers who can pass and make great decisions.
And he does enable Indiana to do that somewhat, just because he's been, you know, so effective as a defensive player, because Indiana loves running these 3 to 4 guard lineups. Well, they call them that, you know, depending on who you classify as a guard and who you classify as a wing, I guess. But, you know, they like playing 4 small players and Miles Turner altogether. And NEMBHARD fits into that. It makes it a little bit easier. I mean, Indiana's still pretty bad defensively, even with NEMBHARD and Turner. The team as a whole is not great, but he helps prevent them from being a complete disaster.
I mentioned Jalen Duren. I don't have a ton to say about Jalen Duren, but I do think that like he's super noteworthy, incredibly strong and athletic. There's kind of some, you know, I maybe it's a Detroit jersey, but you worry a little bit about Andre Drummond syndrome with some of his strengths and weaknesses, but really just jaw-dropping strength and athleticism right off the bat. So I think he's definitely a good draft pick, and he's got a chance to be a really good player.
He's so much more nimble than Andre Drummond was, at least.
Totally.
You know, especially current Andre Drummond.
Yeah.
But like you could see him being a decent, like a guy who can switch onto a perimeter player and hold up defensively, whereas Andre Drummond really never was. I like him as well. He's got a really awesome second jump. And
he does some jaw-dropping things out there.
I didn't quite have him on the players I liked. I do like him. It's not to say I don't like Jalen Duren. Just a little bit too old school of a center's game for me to get excited about yet, although I definitely will if things develop there. Shaedon Sharpe, of course, I had to include him on my likes list. I love Shaedon Sharpe. So much of it is unrealized potential right now. So who knows? I mean, this is a guy who in a few years could be one of the best rookies in this draft class, or could not be. It just like really depends on how things go. Such a unique athlete. He just has like, he's just got like incredible length, you know, and he's not like a small dude, maybe 6'5" or 6'6", but like just the length of his arms, and like with how just quick he is at like getting to the spots he wants to get to on the court. He just, you know, it just seems he seems to be even like bigger than he is, or occupies more space than you would think he would for a guy of his size.
I remember, like, you know, waiting with bated breath about his measurements coming out in the draft combine, because there was so much speculation about it. And a lot of people were like, maybe he's 6'8". Like, people were starting to just comfortably lean into it. And then it came out that he was only 6'4" without shoes. So it's like, oh, okay, that really changes the idea of the player. But then he just has like, he has got like a 6'11" or 7 foot wingspan, where you're just like, okay, so he's basically 6'8". Like, he's just, you know, he's not 6'8" with a 7'2" wingspan, but he's a wing size player with that. And you really notice the arms.
And for the guys who like take advantage of the wingspan, like Shaedon Sharpe's had like several notable tip dunks already this season.
Oh yeah.
But for the guys who are like, who have like really great body control and coordination, which he absolutely does. And for the guys who are like, you know, taking full advantage of the reach of their, like, you know, the pinnacle of their jump shot to get their shots off, which is how he shoots, even though he has a bit of a slow and unconventional form, which can maybe use some cleanup. But like for guys who take advantage of their length, it really is the length of the arms that matters more than like the floor to ceiling height, you know, from their shoes to the top of their head, because like they're using it well. And that's why guys like Eric Gordon can run this, you know, can play a wing and be an effective player, right? Even though he's not very tall, because he has the arms and can use them. And I'm hoping that's the case with Shaedon Sharpe, but like most excited thing obviously is his athleticism at the moment, but there are some real skills there as well. He has been a pretty decent mid-range shooter. And he has been pretty effective at finishing when he gets to the basket as well so far. His three-point shot is okay. The two areas where he struggled the most, I would say, are kind of like that floater range, kind of like that 5 to 8 foot from the basket. He's really good at getting to those spots, and he loves taking these little like flip shots, but they haven't really been going in up to this point. And off-ball defense, he's been horrific, which I think is kind of just a function of, he took like effectively 2 years off of playing basketball before he was drafted. So I think that's a large part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I still feel like he's a bit of a mystery. Like, I still don't really know how to project him in the long term, despite having watched him play in the NBA. Like, he is playing in a fairly like small, like low usage role and operating as just sort of like an injection of athleticism as well as a shooter, and he's good at both those things, but we don't really know what else he can do or in what way he still feels kind of like a blank slate. So
I will say he has the length, he has the athleticism, and he has the level of like intensity needed to be a really good on-ball defender. He just gets lost a lot and confused a lot in defensive sets, which I have no doubt, and maybe this is just like me coping, but I'm pretty confident that's going to improve over time.
My next guy's a little bit maybe controversial, maybe not to you, but I think a lot of people would probably have him in their top 5, and that is Jaden Ivey.
Not in my top 5.
Okay, all right. No controversies on this podcast. No drama. I like a lot of what I see with Ivey. I'm kind of sad that we're not seeing him play with Cade anymore this year, because he looked like he was going to be kind of a real NBA player right away in this like hybrid role where he's going to ignite their transition attack and then turn into a little bit like get to finish a little bit more next to Cade. Like, like he was playing off him a little bit as like a cutter. He was getting more spot up looks, and he wasn't having to run an offense. As a guy running the offense right now, there's lots of things to like, but he's also like he's just a little bit sloppy, like, lots of turnovers where he's dribbling the ball off his knees. There's a little bit too much load up on the shot. So when he's who I was talking about when you were talking about NEMBHARD's funky load up release. The one thing I do like, he's a funny guy to watch because he always looks like he's dribbling with his head down. Like, he looks like an athletic, like a giant overgrown athletic child. He drives into the lane and he has this kind of like crouch sort of pose as he's going full speed, but then he just whips a really slick interior pass to a guy that he did not look like he could see. So there is a nice bit of he's unpredictable in a good way. Like, I think like a lot of his passes surprise me when I'm watching them, and I think and definitely surprise his opponents. So when I think of some of his sloppiness and it part of that is an optimism that there's a lot of like easy stuff to clean up in his game. Like, if those are things that he can improve on and they're like traditionally improvable skills, I think he could be a really, really good offensive player. And he's decisive. Like, he attacks with a lot of purpose a lot of the time.
Yeah, I hope so. I just think the jump shot needs so much work. It's been pretty broken from just about everywhere on the court. He is good at getting to the rim and pretty effective at finishing when he gets there. And I mean, he has a little bit of size as well, and like you said, he does have like willingness to be a playmaker. So those are the like kind of upside things versus a guy who's just kind of like a small guard scorer type of player. So there is like more potential to like actually be a effective starter and a running mate for Cade Cunningham. It's so hard for me to get out of the mindset where I just like I see the small guard dominant on ball scorer archetype and don't kind of like have some inherent bias against that. But like he does have more to his game than that.
I also just say like, he's not that small. Like,
no.
As a lead guard, he's big. As a shooting guard, he's a little bit undersized. So, but if you're playing in a backcourt with Cade, if that's the sort of like ongoing vision in there, I don't think there's anything problematic about his size. I also don't think he'll be relied on to be a lead guard. I've got I've got problems with him as as a scorer. I also think the defense looks mostly bad. He makes some incredible plays. Like I watched all of his, like, it's not like he's a shot blocker, but I went and watched all of his blocks on the season, and he has some incredibly just like absolutely just really impressive thing. He also kind of like tips the ball away from players a lot when they're going up. He makes a lot of defensive plays, but is definitely not a good defender overall yet. And I'm not really projecting that he necessarily will be. I don't really like his side to side movement. He's like more of a fast guy than he is a quick guy. So, but
yeah, like when he gets ahead of steam to the rim, he's pretty unstoppable, but he doesn't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily seem like he uses the size that he does have and the athleticism that he does have to like create separation off of the dribble all that well.
Yeah.
Which is, it's a learned skill. And he's on maybe the most talent-stricken roster in the NBA at the moment with Cade Cunningham out. So he's not.
He has a sucky job. Like being like I think specifically being the point guard, being a rookie point guard on a team like, and if they trade Bojan Bogdanovic, like we were talking about earlier in this pod, the job's getting worse. Like you're playing with like Killian Hayes who can't shoot. You've got a bunch of big men. They can't. Isaiah Stewart actually is shooting the ball pretty well this year. You got Sadiq Bey who has no idea what he wants to be. Like, you know, sometimes plays like he's Carmelo Anthony. And anyways, like it's just it's definitely a junky team to be the point guard of. So, and you know, he's putting up numbers and he's having a lot of like good moments. He's definitely not a good NBA player yet that is helping teams win games, but there's a lot to like about Jaden Ivey's rookie season.
Okay, I got two more guys in the like category. Try to get through these fairly quickly. Number one, Keegan Murray. I like Keegan Murray a lot. He hasn't been as good right away as I thought he would be entering into the season. He hasn't played as much as probably me and you both thought that he would be. He seemed like just such a natural fit, you know, in their either starting lineup or like backing up Harrison Barnes and being like their first wing off of the bench. But his minutes have gradually increased over time, but I think you mentioned he was injured earlier on in the year or had some sort of family issue or something. And he was pretty rough kind of in that range of like early to mid-November. But as the season has gone on, he has gradually improved. And he's gotten more and more playing time as a result. The one thing I will say, though, is some of the advanced metrics really hate Keegan Murray. And it's a little weird, right? Because he has size. He doesn't appear from the eye test to be a horrible defensive player or anything. And he's a really good shooter. Just like, you know, the three-point shooting is good and has very natural looking stroke. But I was kind of shocked by this. Like, he basically never gets to the rim or draws fouls, like, at all. Occasional backdoor cut, but he's basically just shooting threes and mid-range shots. He really is not putting any sort of pressure on the basket whatsoever. And maybe you don't need him to if you have Sabonis and Fox, but you don't necessarily want to draft a guy with the fourth overall pick is just going to be a spot-up shooter either.
Yeah. I had Keegan Murray in my top 5. I had him at fourth. Okay. Yeah, I mean, you already know I was overly high on Keegan Murray in the draft. So for Keegan Murray fans, there's no way to cut that. It's been a pretty disappointing start to the season, and also one that makes you question your initial assumptions or projections of him. He's playing in a really, really low usage role in Sacramento. When you talk about when you talk about his shot profile and stuff like that, when you watch Sacramento play, he's not really involved in the offense very much. Like, no, you know, like if you're watching a team that you don't typically like watch a ton of, but there's a player you're interested in and you like hyper fixate them and you're watching like their off ball offense and you're watching their defense a lot. And with a player, like I remember this with like Andrew Wiggins back in the day, like he just doesn't do anything. Like I would watch whole Timberwolves games where I'm just like, I'm not really sure what happened in the game because I was watching Andrew Wiggins and he just like stood in the corner and like missed a few 3-pointers. And but with Keegan Murray, and I don't really know the whole story here, there were sort of whispers, but because he started the season pretty strong, like first handful of games shooting the ball really, really well, was involved in their offense a little bit more, was getting to the rim a little bit more. And then he had a little back, he exited the game with a little back injury, and kind of all of a sudden was just like, was sort of put on ice. Not like he was still playing, but like all of a sudden, like his field goal attempts dropped like crazy, and he was kind of just standing in the corner doing nothing, which made me wonder if like, okay, we need to dial things back. And then there was I won't get into any details, not that I know anything, but there was like something going on with his family. There was like an illness. It was at least like amongst Sacramento, like the team and its fan base were aware, like, oh, Keegan Murray sort of going through a tough time. And he hasn't really since then been kind of like Sacramento sort of found their identity without him. And Harrison Barnes started the season really, really ice cold and just looking bad. And he's sort of come on and taken that role that was looking like Murray was going to maybe get a jump start on. But now he's just like very clearly like the fifth option. When I watch games, it's like, yeah, it's boring to watch Keegan Murray. When I go and look at the footage and look at a play-by-play, I still see a lot of the things I like. I still see him being a really crafty cutter who can like kind of dip into the nooks and crannies and finish. I just don't really see him around the paint at all ever. So like those are brief moments. The shot comes and goes. Defensively, he's a little bit better around the basket than he is kind of out on the perimeter right now, but he still looks like basically solid at all these things. The question for me and why I was like high on him is like, does he kind of have a lot of that like intangible off-ball game as a mover and as a physical presence in the paint? Because if he doesn't have that, he's just not that high upside of a player, and he's probably just like, yeah, like a starting wing in the NBA, but probably a guy that is your fourth or fifth option kind of thing. So I mean, it's something to like, I've seen the bad possibilities of Keegan Murray now that I'm like considering more. And I know people who are low on him in the draft really thought he wasn't athletic enough, or thought he wasn't like, his game was too simple. He's also a player that I feel when he makes a physical play, all of a sudden he looks huge. He looks like a power forward. Like he'll rise up for a short jumper, or he'll like grab a rebound, and just like, oh, all of a sudden you just look like you were like 6'11" or something like that. And then there's other plays where he just kind of like, where he's just sort of spotting up and all of a sudden like you look like you're 6'5". Like he's a weird player, and I'm kind of like cooling my jets with Keegan Murray projections. I still see the stuff that I like about him, but I can't tell how much of it's going to be in a game. And I don't think right now is going to be like the time to really learn a lot about him, because he's doing so little out there, just really low usage role.
Yeah. He does kind of have that dad bod going on.
He doesn't look strong.
Well, I mean, or at least he doesn't leverage his strength in the right ways. But he reminds me a little bit of Jabari Parker, just kind of like the way he's built.
Doesn't have Jabari Parker's crazy first step though. No. But he's a little bit better at the other parts of basketball that Jabari was not.
Yeah. I don't have anyone else on my like list because we already went over Walker Kessler earlier. So that was my last guy.
I've got one guy left on my list that I'm hoping will be controversial, but he's not in my top five. I'm gonna talk about Bennedict Mathurin.
I saw this one coming.
Really? Because you just know that I've been low on him in the past. I think that there's still a lot to like about his game. Mm-hmm. I think that the reason, if any of our listeners aren't familiar, is like Bennedict Mathurin is probably like in most people's number 2 spot as like the sort of runner up for rookie of the year. And there was even a moment when Paolo Banchero got injured where people were wondering if Bennedict Mathurin could steal the rookie of the year award with some good luck and some continued good play. But he's not been good for a while now. Like that, it's that initial burst of like, all-star level play from him this season is like very much in the rear view mirror. Right now, I still like the game. He's so forceful and physical for a player his size. Like he's not that big, but he plays a lot bigger. I think he's in a good situation, like I was saying about NEMBHARD, where like he's playing with a bunch of point guards all the time. So he just gets to stay so aggressive and always be kind of in this crazy attack mode. But he's been getting less efficient as the season has gone on, and has been missing 3-point shots for over a month now. And a lot of his shots that were dropping early in the season, not just from three, but like his paint attacks, he just like goes into a floater all the time. Like he just reminds me of like, I remember like when I was like a kid and first starting to sort of like figure out my athleticism, and I would just sort of run at the hoop and just sort of jump and like throw the ball wildly in the air. And I'd have these games where the ball would go in and I'd just be like, I'm a really great basketball player. And then like, a week later I'm playing again and I just miss every single one of these shots. And I'm like, what happened? I thought I was a good basketball player. And that's what Bennedict Mathurin looks like right now. He's still trying these crazy shots. They're not dropping. He's way too automatic with the floater. I don't mean in terms of it going down, in terms of it. Like I watched him attempt a floater from 0 feet and the big man hadn't rotated to help. So he's on a guard. There's no reason to just sort of like attack and get a layup. But for whatever reason, he kind of like stops and goes into his floater motion and tosses up this high arcing thing. I'm like, is that just a weird instinct you have? So I haven't liked everything that I've seen from him. And I'm not convinced like he's going to get over the rookie wall and go back to the like insane 40% 3-point shooting and rim attacks that he had from earlier. I do like how aggressive he is though. Like, and that's something that I think is a good solid foundation for his game. If he can refine his like finishing package a little bit, which he shows signs of.
Yeah. And to your point, since December 1st, 15 points a game, down from earlier in the season where he's averaging, upwards of 20. And he's down to 23% from 3 since that point. So he has gone through kind of an insane dry streak from the 3-point line. And is that going to continue for the rest of his rookie season? Like, I don't think so. I don't think it'll be 23%, but I think it'll end up being somewhere in between his hot shooting start to begin the season.
And he's got a track record for that. So it would be silly to project him to not be a solid 3-point shooter with how well he shot the ball in college.
Yeah.
So that was just a taste for what is to come, our top 5 rookies, which will be uploaded in a couple of days. And as soon as that video is up, you can find it by clicking right here on this link. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.